I'm a nerd. Like, there's no question about it. Like, I'm a nerd. I like, being exposed to all these different companies, all these different problems. I love working with the founders to come up with those solutions. Like, I wake up every day excited about the work I do, and I hadn't felt that way for 10 years. Like, honestly, like, I just hadn't felt that way about the work I did. I did it because I was good at it. I did it at really cool companies, and actually, I loved my colleagues. I love many of the things I did, but it just didn't drive me in the same way. So if anything, I feel like I'm a little selfish, right? Because I'm like, this is about me. Like, I get to do something that fills me up every day. And so that's really, really, it's amazing.
Dean and Gay family. I am writer Dream, and I'm here with B Pagels-Minor. They are a venture capitalist, business consultant, coach, and just the overall specialist in product development within tech companies. They're also the first transgender person to own a venture capitalist company, and they're here with us today to just explain a little bit more about what they do, why that's important for our community, and just much more that we're going to learn today about venture capital and the business within. So, B, you're welcome to say hey to the Gay family.
Hey, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to have this conversation
We're
with y'all.
excited to have you here. I understand that you are a Chicago native, correct?
Not exactly. So Chicago is my second home. So I'm originally from Mississippi. So I was born in, a
Okay.
small town in Mississippi. And then I went to kind of like the latter part of elementary school through high school in
Okay.
Memphis, Tennessee. And then I ended up in Chicago for 12 years once I transferred to Northwestern University. And I fell in love with the city. In fact, I'm still in love with the city. I'm not in love with the weather, but I'm very in love
Okay.
with the
So you
city still.
definitely tie like Mississippi, Tennessee as far as your growing up roots kind of thing.
Correct. Like that's my home
Okay.
base for sure.
Tell me like life was like back home before you actually made your transition to other states and places.
Yeah, so it's actually so interesting. I was having a conversation with someone. So I
Mm-hmm.
live in LA now, and so I was having a conversation with someone who's in LA, and she was just like, "Oh my gosh, you're from Mississippi, Tennessee. Like, what is that?" And I'm like, "Actually, it was really awesome growing up there, right?" So where I'm from in Mississippi, we have lots of land. So you get on a 4-wheeler and you drive the 4-wheeler around and go get dirty and muddy and have a good time with your friends and your family. In fact, we played tag on 4-wheelers, so you'd have to flash the light hit someone, and that's how you would tag them in. And so it's actually this really interesting thing. And in fact, now that I have a kid, I kind of miss that environment where folks really kind of like you go into town and people knew who you were, they knew who your family members were, they'd always have a kind word to say to you because they're just like, well, your grandfather, your great grandfather, your mother, like we went to school together or something like that. So it was a very community oriented, very tight knit community. And I miss it in a lot of ways. Obviously, Mississippi and Tennessee are very
Mm-hmm.
different now, compared to when I started off there. Because, like, for instance, I went back home to Memphis last year, and I was like, wait, I was like, y'all have like a Michelin recommended restaurant. I was like, this is different. I was like, I was like, the Catfish Cabin was as good as we got, when I was coming up down there. And now, there's so much different like economic opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunity that is in that
Mm-hmm.
region in general. And so I'm super excited for how it's also evolving
Okay.
over time.
How was that transition going from basically you're describing this close, tight knit community, everything's around. I'm sure like familiar with local people and in your area to moving down to where you are in LA and like did that come with venture capital immediately when you started this firm?
No, no. So what actually ended up happening for me is that I'm an accidental career
Okay.
person, right? Virtually everything that's ever happened in my career has just been a happy accident and through curiosity. So, when I first actually graduated from high school in Memphis, I went to Duke University and I
Okay.
hated it, right? Because Duke, is a great university, but in order to be successful, you need to be able to do internships and things like that. And I came from a historically very poor family. And so, they didn't have money to help me get an apartment in New York or some other East Coast city so I could do internships. And so ultimately, one of the reasons I decided to transfer to Northwestern is because it was in Chicago and it meant that I could get an apartment. I'd be able to pay my rent, all year round, which by the way, I was coming with shenanigans. I was like, I will take out an extra student loan so I can pay my rent for the whole year. So at least I know that I'm gonna have a house for the whole year and I can do the internship and all these other types of things. And through my internships, I started off in consulting And then, I, graduated around the same time as the economic downturn. And so I ended up not being a consultant, and I ended up actually being a store manager at Target. And through that Target relationship, I actually they agreed to pay for part of my
Okay.
grad school. And as a part of my grad school journey, they required you to go to certain types of activities to prove that you were trying to establish a career in your chosen area. First of all, I didn't know what my chosen area was. I was just going to grad school, so I didn't have to pay student loans, to be truthful. But, I happened to meet someone who worked in tech, and he was just so interesting, and what he was talking about was interesting enough that I ended up interviewing there. And that was my very first tech job. And so that was, starting off as a, tech support person, and eventually as a tech support manager, and then agency relationship manager, and then product person. And so that's really what ended up with this product trajectory. Now that I was in product all the way until 2021-ish, right? So 2021, I leave Netflix, have a baby, and then, my wife and I were kind of taking a look around, like, we're in the best economic position we've ever been in. What do you want to do? And so it started off with me actually having this desire to continue doing consulting work that I've been doing for years. So I'd always done this consulting stuff on the side because, it's one of those things where you're like, I can't work for you because you don't pay me enough, but I think you're a cool company. I think you're an awesome person, and I would like to support you in what you're trying to do. And so that's what I would do with these folks. I would go through, I would consult with them. And then, as a part of my journey in late 2021, 2022, I really started to focus on seed and Series A companies and really helping them get to great funding. And through that process of trying to get the funding, I just kept increasingly becoming frustrated because I was just like, well, like these companies are really good, and I'm not a person who has hyperbole about these things, right? Because I'm a very pragmatic person. I was like, but this company is like legitimately quite excellent, and I don't understand why they're not getting funding. Like, why is this happening? And the reality was that they didn't have the right profile because they were from cities like Memphis or Omaha, Nebraska, or Denver, Colorado, outside of the traditional investment paradigm. And so my firm actually came about because I asked all those people who I respected who were in VC why I couldn't get more money for these folks. And they were like, because you're not the one who's writing the check. It was that simple. And so that's why I ultimately decided to start the venture firm. LA helps, right? It's always really good to be in one of the capital, one of the capital states of VC. So it creates a lot of opportunity for me to meet lots of people who've been doing this for a long time. And it's like getting a master's degree in VC, just living in California and being around these people. But the reality is that the grit that it took to even desire to create a company like this is because I'm a kid from Mississippi. Right? I'm a kid from Mississippi. I know we're freaking awesome in Mississippi, and we should have the same economic opportunities as every other state that exists in this country.
Okay. Can you, for our viewers who may not know, could you give us a venture capital 101, or the similarities versus where if they would have got funding from elsewhere, like a local or national bank or a private loan and things like that? Give us just a summary of what your job entitles and how that can benefit the companies that you work with.
Yeah, so the simplest way to think about venture capital is that it's an alternative mechanism for a company to get funding outside of traditional resources like a bank, right? So if you go to a bank, they're going to ask you for a business plan that clearly shows a few things. So one, that there is, a clear a clear use case, like there's clear customers. They probably will also ask you to already have all those customers lined up already to be able to receive, a loan, right? And so that's a loan, right? And then they're going to tell you that loan has to be paid back at this certain percentage rate, and it has to be completely paid off by this end date. And venture capital is not exactly like that, right? So in venture capital, you go to a venture capitalist and you tell them about your idea. In some cases, you may have been a business that's already been established for a period of time, so you have customers. But and those are ones that we usually call like seed stage and beyond. Or you might be someone who is a pre-seed company, right? Which is that you just have a great idea, right? You don't have customers yet for it. You may not have a clear product market fit for it. And so product market fit is where you have both customers and the customers who use your product at an explosive rate, and you can do it profitably. So you probably don't have anything close to that. So it's really like one person I know talked to is like, it's like the hopes and dreams phase
is that
of a business
seed
where you're
and
just
Series A? Is that kind of the same thing?
Well, so if you don't have like customers and you're still trying to figure out completely everything, that's usually called
Okay.
pre-seed, right? So pre-seed is like, you know, I just really think I'm brilliant. It's like, well, SpaceX in some ways is still kind of a pre-seed company, right? Because they haven't proven that they can, have these rockets go up all the time. They haven't proven that there's people who even will pay for these rockets. They haven't proven a lot of these different things, and so they're not profitable. But but they get funding because it's such a good idea. And so, people extrapolate that there has to be some possibility that this company can be successful and can create, a huge economic opportunity for their investors. And so that's the difference, right? So in VC, we're betting on your potential, and there's certain things that you can't that we can't possibly know. And that's why also there's an assumption that more than 50% of companies that receive VC funding will fail, right? And so when you're, as a VC person, you're trying to create a portfolio of companies that you think have a high likelihood of being successful, right? And so, for instance, a common thought process is that you only need one great company in your portfolio. So one great company could be the $1 billion idea, and then that will help you return funds for your entire portfolio. So again, as a TLDR, VC is an alternative way to receive funding as a business, especially when you don't have a traditional business model or traditional business metrics, but you have a really good idea and a really good team. And so VC people are essentially saying, I think it's more likely than not that you will be successful. And that's why I'm choosing to invest in you.
How would you weigh like cost versus say risk when it comes to the companies or businesses that you invest in, or maybe like your investment isn't always money, but there's still like a risk. I guess it's like even putting your time into it. How do you weigh those when you're going through different brands?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good point, right? Because every single investment, like I said, more than half of the companies you're going to invest in are probably going to fail. And so you do want to be selective, right? Because there's a certain amount of energy. Like, no matter how small or big your firm is, you have to, staff that firm. You have to figure out how you want to, dedicate resources, all those different types of things. I think the first thing you have to think about is, so when I'm thinking about founders, like ultimately when I'm making an investment, I'm thinking about the founder. Like, this is the person in front of me. Do I think they have the potential to be successful? Yes. Do I think this particular company is going to be the one that's successful? Hopefully. But the reality is that sometimes people will have one, two, or three companies that fail before they have that fourth one that actually hits it out of the ballpark, right? And that's actually, it's not that abnormal, right? It's kind of similar to many other things. Like, you continue to learn over and over and over again, and the more that you learn, the better you will be at being a founder, for instance. And so, first and foremost, I look at founders and think, does this person have a high potential or high likelihood for being successful long term? Because if they do, then it makes sense for me to invest my time and energy in that person. Because even if this deal doesn't work out, that fourth or fifth deal might work out. The second thing is that there's different types of access that certain types of investments might get you. So let's say if you're super excited about healthcare, and so you're looking for a really great investment that will help, put you on the mark as a healthcare investor. You might take a little bit of a risk that you're like, well, it's a little bit outside. Like, there might be a little bit of this or a little bit of that. And so you might take that little bit of a risk because you want to get into the game so that you can
Mm-hmm.
increase your deal flow, for instance, right? Because again, majority of your companies are going to fail. So the quicker you can get connected with companies that are less likely to fail, the better it will be for you and your investors. And then the third thing is just really, really simple, which is like sometimes you're just like, well, darn, like there is risk here, but it's just so freaking cool, right? Like, it's so cool if we can pull off just even a small percentage of what we want to accomplish here. This would be a game changer. You could change the world, right? I think about the COVID-19 virus, the mRNA technology or whatever they use for that. That woman had been working on that for 20 years, like actually maybe even longer than that. So she had been working on this, and everyone was just like, "This is a dumb idea." Right? But at the same time, they were like, there's just enough here that it
Mm-hmm.
could be worth something. And so it took that long for that to prove its value. And now it's, arguably it's the whole reason Pfizer and so many other companies have had gangbuster years in terms of investments because they're employing this technology. And so again, you have to look at this larger picture of, you know, all things being equal, because VC takes a long time to materialize, right? So just one fund, it could take anywhere from 10 to 15 years for you to reap any reward from it. And so because you're thinking about it from that perspective, risk is different, right? It's more about what is the opportunity for learning, for connections, for, elevating yourself in a certain, vertical. All those things end up being a little bit more important than whether it's this like a risk, right? Because
Okay.
everything is a
So would
risk.
you agree that like investing in particular ventures can just reap benefits in different types of directions? Okay.
Correct. Yeah, it's so many different things you can have. I mean, even like for myself, like I'm currently, evaluating a deal where, one, I am very bullish on the product, but it's actually so crazy to me who's on the cap table with this particular deal, where I'm just like, oh, well, if I can get in on this cap table, then I'll probably get to meet this person or that person. These are people that I would like to meet, right? Because I think they would help me long term in my VC career, right? And so you're always trying to find like those like different things, because ultimately, again, your responsibility is to return value to
Mm-hmm.
your investors. But the way you return value to your investors is usually by access, right? The more access you have, the higher likelihood that you're going to get into that, like you're going to get an opportunity for a really amazing deal. And that deal will be the whole reason that, your fund does
Okay.
well.
So based off your personal experience in venture capitalism, what could you say like your top values? I know you discussed access. You also discussed like financial return. What do you think you value the most as far as returns given to you from these businesses?
Well, so it's actually so interesting here because, like, so, my firm, Divergent Ventures, we only invest in the middle America, which we define as the South, the Midwest, and the Mountain West combined. So it's
Mm-hmm.
38 states that I'm from. So actually, the biggest value to me is accomplishing this mission of increasing the amount of VC investment that
Mm-hmm.
goes to those states, right? Because less than 20% goes into those states. And when I think about the lack of economic opportunity that I saw when I was coming up, it really felt wrong, right? That so many folks who are so talented have to leave their homes to go to Silicon Valley like I did to get an opportunity to do good work that is enjoyable. And so I think that that's really like the huge motivator for me, is really spreading the word about this inequity that happens here, right? Especially since, those states actually also encompass 67% of the US population, right? It doesn't make sense that they have such little VC investment. So that just personally is just something that's on my heart. It's something I'm really passionate about. I'm very gung ho about. And then separately, this is very enjoyable. Like I'm a nerd. Like there's no question about it. Like I'm a nerd. I like, being exposed to all these different companies, all these different problems. I love working with the founders to come up with those solutions. Like I wake up every day excited about the work I do, and I hadn't felt that way for 10 years. Like honestly, like I just hadn't felt that way about the work I did. I did it because I was good at it. I did it at really cool companies, and actually, I love my colleagues. I love many of the things I did, but it just didn't drive me in the same way. So, if anything, I feel like I'm a little selfish, right? Because I'm like, this is about me. Like, I get to do something that fills me up every day, and so that's really, really, it's amazing,
Why do you
honestly.
think it's important for venture capitalists or any type of investment firm to invest into LGBT brands or companies?
Yeah, so actually, let me talk about diverse people in general, right? Because obviously, so I'm a trans, non-binary human. I also identify as lesbian. That's the first identity I had outside of being black. But diverse companies, diverse founders, um, they statistically outperform their counterparts. It's
Okay.
just a fact. Like it's a fact, right? And so when I think about why it's important to invest in these, LGBTQ folks or BIPOC folks or women, I think about it as that it's about being a proper, a reasonable fiduciary for other people's money, right? Like if the statistics show us that diverse companies do better, then it seems like we should go
Mm-hmm.
find diverse companies, right? Because we want to make sure our investors get their money back. And so, I think a lot of people somehow think that this is a handout, like especially with like this affirmative action case that just went down. People think all this is a handout. when I got into Duke University, when I got into Northwestern University, I was top of my class. Like I was the absolute cream
Mm-hmm.
of the crop, you know? And I think the same way about these founders. Like, oftentimes they have more education, they have more work experience, they're more capital efficient, they care more about their communities and their companies and their products. So they're better products in general. Like I think about Honeypot. So Honeypot is a great example of a company that is one that I wish I'd been an investor when they first started off because, it's a woman who said, I wanted to solve this problem for my community because we didn't have products that did it. And then she created something that was revolutionary, that is a multi-million-dollar product, that is a brand in and of itself. And it's because she cared about the people around
Mm-hmm.
her, right? And I think that that's something that makes sense. When we look at some of the companies that have failed, terribly recently. So FTX is a great example. They didn't care really about anything other than making money, right? I don't think that that really works long term, especially because modern society consumers are much more savvy. They care a lot more about what's going in their bodies. They care a lot more where their money's going, all these other types of things. And so it's going to be much more difficult for companies that don't have um, a specific purpose or goal outside of making money to be as successful. I mean, like Apple's the wealthiest company in the world, right? So it just crossed $3 trillion. And when you talk to people who have Apple products, they'll say it's the
Mm-hmm.
best, right? But then when you get into the nitty gritty of it, they'll say, well, it's the best because it's so easy to use. So many of us also have like elder family members who can use iPhones because it's so easy to do the accessibility functions, and it means that they can use their phone. I know people who are blind or, hard of hearing and so many other types of things who can use those devices. And the reason that Apple has products that hit all those different categories of people is they have one of the most diverse
Okay.
workforces in the world, right? And so I come back to this idea that it all comes back to this very simplistic thing, which is diverse people build amazing things that de-risk your investment. And then that's why you should care about investing in diverse people.
What direction would you point these persons or groups in to as far as what they were seeking out venture capitalist firms or like I guess tips on connecting or networking as like a startup possibly?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I always tell people go look at the top 100 list of VC firms that are out there, and then sign up for their
Okay.
newsletters. Like, so sign up for their newsletters. Usually, newsletters are very good because they'll explain to you one, where do these people go, right? Because getting investment, whether it's VC or even from a bank, is still very relationship based, right? So you want to be someone who's in the same spaces as people who write the checks. And so signing up for those newsletters mean that you will find out exactly where they go. And so you can go to the same conferences, the same, events, et cetera, stuff like that. Secondly, they usually tell you exactly what you need to do to get funding from them, right? They'll say the types of companies we like to invest in are A, B, C, D, E, and it's because of X, Y, Z. And so then you can go through and build a company that is reflective of something that they want to invest in, right? That's a really great thing, again, about modern, technology, modern VC, is that virtually everyone knows that they have to have a voice
Mm-hmm.
out there so that it's very easy for people to understand what to do and how to execute on it, that type of thing. Um, I think that, the second part of that too is that also there's people like me. I mean, there's like people like me and, so many other VCs, like, and I usually tag them too, right? Who I'm just like, oh, these were people who are super gung ho about, investing in outside of the normal paradigms. So also, once you see those people, connect with us, send us messages that make sense. Like, don't send a message being like, hey, help me get money. I've literally had someone send a message like that. I was like, who sends a message like that? No, it's like, hey, B, I read an article about what you were saying, or I saw an interview, or I saw your post. That was really good. I am a startup that does XYZ. I'm also this type of founder. I'm trying to figure out how do I do blah, 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 blah. That's how you approach people, right? Because most of us, again, we realize that deal flow is the number one thing that we have to have. So, like, lots of people apply to our funds, but not like a lot of people apply are not investable. And so a lot of the work that we have to do is figure out who those diamonds in the rough are, who can become that unicorn company too. So most of us are pretty willing to have conversations with folks. We just need to make sense and to be professional and to be kind Because also the other thing is I get hundreds of messages. And so every once in a while I'll get a message from someone saying, hey, I sent you a message a week ago, you haven't responded. And I was like, and I'm down from 5,000 messages to 1,800 this week. So that's how far down the list you are in terms of it. As like it has nothing to do with whether I like you or dislike you. Just the simple fact that we have a lot of things that we have to go through each day and week. And people who are who give grace and who have grace. As always, some people are just like, oh, that's a cool person. Let me make sure I prioritize that person too. So it's also about that. So again, I'm from Mississippi. So you show you have some good home training, you got a good head on your shoulders. Chances are, I'm going to want to talk to you, and I think a lot of other people will want to as well.
I'm glad you brought up the idea of identifying what brands and companies are investable. Because my next question was, I know that you said you target a lot of your target areas are regional based. I was going to ask you to get any more specific than that as far as what brands people offer. I know back when, well, correct me if I'm wrong, when you're more consulting based, you were dealing with healthcare of transgender persons. Do you still like dive into that world a lot more? Or what are your parameters for who's investable?
Yeah, so first of all, consulting or investing, I'm pretty agnostic to vertical. So I prefer tech-enabled companies because that's my background. Although, let's just be truthful, if someone came up with a cure for cancer and that deck came across my desk, chances are I would figure out how to invest in that company, right? Like, even though it's outside of my wheelhouse, I'd have to bring on a consultant or something. But the reality is that my career is very, very varied, right? So I've been across many different industries, and that means that to me, I understand that there's a lot of different possibilities in terms of what could be great investment opportunities long term. So I am generally agnostic. I do have a penchant to prefer certain types of companies, right? So I love B2B companies, like B2B SaaS companies that are solving complicated business problems. Always a no-brainer, right? Because, we know that major corporations will always spend a lot of money for those types of things. I also like companies that are, in healthcare, because I think healthcare is one of those things that we can still need. We need so much more work there in order to create, a healthy society. I'm very into fintech and human capital as well, right? I think that there's still a lot of potential, um, crypto has failed in many ways, but it doesn't mean that we can't figure out how to be more efficient in how money transfers work, or the different ways that we think about how consumers use money. So I'm always interested in these types of things, but again, I'm generally kind of agnostic, because I'm really more interested in seeing all that's out there and then choosing the absolute best out of everything versus trying to hamper myself down into one specific category.
Okay. Now, Divergent Ventures is fairly a new company. Start like towards the end of last year, correct? What are some
Correct.
obstacles or achievements that we've already come across that you feel comfortable sharing with the Gaye family? I guess the road that you've been traveling on so far.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start off with the negative and end
Okay.
with the positive. So the negative is that this is the most challenging fundraising period in modern VC history, right? And so that's a challenge, right? So it's going to be much slower than it has been in the past. I tell my team we'll take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years, for instance, to do the full fundraise, right? And that's fine, right? In fact, though, and to be truthful, for many Black VC folks, it generally, actually, Black VC folks and also women, it generally would take about 2 years anyway. So, for instance, when you think about previous VC periods when people said they could raise in like 6 or 8 months, those were usually cisgender white men, right? So, it's always been harder for, diverse people to fundraise in VC. So that's always a challenge. The second part is that it's obviously, it's one of those things that you can't really go to school for, right? So even you can have all the education in the world, but you still just don't know the nuance of what will be a challenge and what won't be a challenge. And so that's always kind of complicated and kind of convoluted. And so, you're constantly trying to learn as quickly as possible before that thing comes and bites you in the butt. So it's always like kind of that chicken and egg, like, okay, should I start learning about this thing yet? And it's like, well, I probably might as well, because next week I might end up in a situation where I really need to know about it. right? And so it becomes that kind of like that little bit of a difficult environment from there. But in terms of wins, I've been very pleasantly surprised at, like, so for instance, I just received this VC Include Fellowship, which has been, tremendous. I have been included on a number of lists of VCs to look out for, LGBTQ plus and women with an X and, black, VCs and stuff like that. So it's been very good. I think just in general, I think it's been really great to see people's responses to me and what I'm trying to do. Like when I first started, a lot of the conversation would be like, but why do you care about middle America? And now the people are like, oh, now that you show all this data, I totally understand why you care about middle America. And so it's really nice to kind of, as I continue to become better, to see how great the response has been to the mission, to the goal. And, and I'm more bullish now. Like if you'd asked me in March before all of the banks started failing, I was like, oh, well, I don't know. And now, like, and actually in some ways after all the failures, the fact that I'm like, oh, I'm actually having better clarity now on what it takes to do this, it actually makes me feel more comfortable. So I'm more bullish on what I'm doing now than even when it was probably, it seemed like it was a little bit more of an ideal state.
I see. It looks like you might be home. Are you home? Okay,
yeah, I'm
cool.
in my home office.
Do you typically do most of your work remote, or like do you ever find yourself in hands-on environment when it comes to the businesses that you work with, or can we expect like any type of accelerator programs from Divergent in the future?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we probably won't. So one of the things I really am focused on is having a laser focus. And so when I was doing my research, a lot of people try to do like, we have a venture studio and an accelerator and we have a fund. And I just feel like it starts to really become difficult to maintain all of that. So we have a lot of strategic partnerships. So we have strategic partnerships with like Generator, for instance, which is kind of the largest mid-market accelerator. We have partnerships with some of the Techstars locations in the cities that are in states that we invest in. We also have, strategic partnerships with like Bronze Valley and some other ones. So strategic partnerships are how we kind of do the accelerators. In terms of being hands-on, first and foremost, what I was talking to someone because someone was just like, well, but you're in LA. How do you support these people in middle America? I was like, even if I was in middle America every single day, I would still be on phone calls with folks, right? Because it's just impossible to coordinate schedules, right? It's actually surprising to me that even when we're like, okay, we can meet in the middle of the night, and it's like, well, actually, I still have blah, 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 blah. And so it gets very difficult. So it would still be mostly phone calls and video calls and things like that. But I do try to travel to various states within my investable regions as much as possible. And in fact, like, and then even outside of my investable regions, you end up at these events and conferences where people are there that are across, the nation. So you want to go. So for instance, over the past few weeks, I've been in, Chicago, New York, Atlanta. Next week I'm going to New Orleans and then Alabama. So we're trying to go to as many, cities and states across the investable regions as much as possible. And then my team members and my advisory board, they're primarily in our investable regions as well. So, trying to spread out this like network of people who are all part of the Divergent family to be in the spaces that we can be at. So like if someone wants to have a quick coffee, even if I'm not there, they can have a quick coffee with someone on the team. And so that's the different ways that we try to navigate all of this. And then just lastly, one of the reasons our fund, so like, one of the criticisms I get is that they're like, your fund is kind of small. Like you could possibly do a bigger fund. And I was like, yeah, I could, but I'm actually a solo GP. And I'm a solo GP who understands what it means to be responsible for someone else's money. Because I've been a director on board for many years. And so one of the first things that you learn when you're a director on board is that you're the fiduciary, right? You ultimately are making decisions that will change the trajectory of an organization, that will change the trajectory of people's jobs. And I take the same amount of seriousness to VC, right? And so what that means is that $10 million is something that I can manage and maintain on my own. And if everyone else fell off the side of fell off the face of the earth, I would still be able to do it. And so that's why I like that amount, because it means that I can still like have phone calls, every single week, right, with people. It means that I can jump on a plane if necessary to go help a bunch of my investors, a bunch of my founders, and across a couple of different states. And that's not too bad. but it makes sense in terms of being able to do the work in the way that I think it has to be done to de-risk the investments.
I want to take a small step back. You mentioned solo GP. Could you, I'm assuming that's an acronym, could you tell us what that is and
Yes.
what that encompasses?
Yeah. So GP stands for general partner. So every fund has at least one general partner. And so the general partner is a person who's ultimately responsible for the fund. And then and so for instance, they also are usually the only ones who can write the check. They're the only ones who can officially say yes, all the other good stuff. And so for some funds, so every fund, like I said, has at least one, and then some funds have more than one. For me, because I am the only GP, we're called a solo GP fund. And so sometimes solo GP funds will be they're considered a little bit riskier, right? Because like what happens if that person gets hit by a bus? Or if you try to do a $25 million or $50 million fund, and especially if it's like a seed stage or something like that, that's dozens and dozens of companies that you've invested in. And it's really difficult to manage dozens and dozens of companies well, right? And so like there are some people who will take the approach of like, we just write a check and we step away. I don't think that that's a good use of my investors' money. And so that's why, again, as a solo GP, I think the amount that I chose makes sense because I can do it. Now, if I had a partner, maybe we'd have a $25 million fund. If we had three partners, maybe we'd have a $50 million fund. Like, that's kind of how it goes. Like, you know, the more partners you have, the more you think you can actually be able to execute on, you know, a fund, larger fund sizes in a substantial and valid
Do
way.
you see Divergent Ventures acquiring more GPs in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, so actually, so interesting. So far on my team, I have a chief of staff, and then we just brought on an associate. Both of them have tremendous potential, right? And that's the goal. Like, you know, I think about this as Divergent Ventures is going to be an amazing, dynamic VC firm for the next 50 years, right? And we're going to hire people into our company that we think have the potential to be GPs. And so, you know, our chief of staff, so he's originally from Nigeria, and he really wants to create an Africa fund one day. And I'm like, bet, let's do it. Like we're gonna have an Africa fund. The associate, she's originally from Canada, although she's moving to North Carolina, and she's like, I would really like to have a fund for Canadian women. Right. So bet, like, let's do it. And so, yeah, I do think that, like, yeah, over time, I would like to have many more GPs in the firm. In fact, I would like to have a firm that has like one of the best track records of promoting our, you know, talented staff into the GP position in the whole country.
Okay, that sounds cool. With all that you do, I also understand that you have a family as well. Do you ever find any difficulties like managing all these different brands and companies and also as managing your household?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a task, right? So, you know, my wife and I, we're still getting adjusted to this life, right? Because one of the things I think that no one really understands when you first get into VC is how much you have to be in the streets, right? Like I'm like a person who likes to like go out for dinners and stuff like that. So like I'm like, when I first was thinking about it, I was like, oh, it's like not a big deal. Like it's like I'm like, no, actually, I would like to be at home and like hang out with my family because I've had to go out 3 days this week for LP meetings or an introduction to someone or a mixer, right? You know, or like, you know, going out of town, you know, over the past weeks, my wife actually sent me a message. She was like, texting me, she was like, this is when I was out of town. She was like, I feel like I haven't seen you in like a week. And I was like, wait, I don't think we really have. Cause like I kept getting in late and then I had to fly out. So like, it was like a week of like us barely seeing each other. And so no, it's a task, right? But I think what we always keep in mind is that one, you have to come to conclusions what your family's goals are. It's our goal is that we understand that we're a family that both wants to have a great deal of economic leeway so that we can do the things that we dream of, but we're also a family that really, really cares about society and creating a better world. And so because we feel that way, you know, we're okay with making these sacrifices for now, right? Because we know that they're creating a world that's going to be better for our children. But I also know that this is why it's so great that, you know, we're hiring such talented people because there probably will be moments where, you know, we roll out future funds where I won't be the GP of that fund, right? I'll say, hey, you go out and do it because I'm going to take a break from this one and I'm just going to just focus on maintaining the firm and being present for my family for that period of time, right? Especially when the kid starts Little League. I really want to play Little League and I really want to be the coach. So, like, I definitely have to make that happen. And so I think that's the thing. So it is definitely a balancing act. And even people who don't have kids, they say the same thing, right? It's very tiring. It's a lot of work. But again, it only works if you're super passionate about it. Because if you're not super passionate about it, it won't work for you, because it is so much effort that you spend trying to get out there. Because again, trying to get into the space that you find $1 billion company takes a lot of work to get there. It takes a lot of face time. It takes a lot of feet on the ground. But again, it's worth it if you plan and set expectations properly for your family.
Being trans and non-binary, have you ever had any obstacles that you can attach to those exclusively as you navigate yourself as a venture capitalist?
Yeah, so it's actually so interesting. So kind of, maybe a little bit. So for instance, I hired a service to do outreach to LPs for me. So LPs are limited partners, and those are the people who actually invest in your fund. And I said, like, one of the messages in my signature on this thing that they sent out, it said, B Pagels-Minor, affirming pronouns are they, them, theirs, right? And someone responded back saying, get that political BS out of my inbox. I don't need that. And I was just like, wow. I was like, and it was the first time. It was like, and I'm sure, and the thing that's so interesting, I was telling my wife about it afterwards. I was like, there's probably other people who felt this, right? Like, I have to assume there's other people who felt this. But that was the first time anyone had been very explicit about their bias to me. And it was like, I had that moment where I was just like, wow. I was like, with everything going in the world, I can't be surprised about it, right? I can't be surprised. I mean, there's probably even people right now who, when I submitted my deck to them, they probably, just decided not to do anything about it, because I'm also explicit in my deck that I'm trans, right? And part of my strategy in life, though, is to be very upfront and out about who I am. Not because, it's my job to come out to everyone, but it is my job to create clear boundaries to people, right? And my boundary is, if you can't accept me for who I am and all of me of who I am, then I don't want to do business with you anyway. But it is frustrating that, considering how important it is for me to accomplish this goal, this focus that I have, that there are literally people who probably have a similar interest as I do, who've passed on me solely because of my identity and haven't given me the chance. And my only hope is that as we continue to succeed and we do well, that those people just are like they just feel shitty, honestly.
I understand that.
When the firm does well and we do exceptionally well, and they're like, man, I missed the opportunity to invest in that firm because of my own bias, And then hopefully that will help them interrogate their bias, because I do think, like I said, I think we're going to do exceptionally well. And there's a lot of people who, as I reflect, who probably didn't want to participate because of who
I
I
guess the
am.
results definitely speak for themselves. And I also want to add, like, when I was on your Instagram, I like how you had a video, you're with your son, kind of just giving a little bit of insight of like why you do what you do and why is that important, and setting an example for him. And they kind of hearing what you were just describing right now, battling these obstacles, it was kind of like full circle, because it made me think of how you may feel your example or image ultimately looks for your son. And I think that's super amazing that you're transparent with your journey and, just alongside of your business.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's so interesting because so I just think one note that's super important. I didn't come out, like, so for instance, I didn't come out as a lesbian until freshman year of college to my mother, and I wasn't really out to everyone. And then I didn't come out to the rest of my family and like everyone until like senior year of college. And then I didn't come out as trans until I was almost 30.
Okay.
And I think that that's super important, though, because, like, to me, one of the reasons I didn't is because I did grow up in Mississippi. My dad's a Baptist minister, and I felt very uncomfortable for most of my life. And I felt like, one of the reasons I wasn't as successful in my earlier career was because I was so uncomfortable. And so now, because it's so important that I'm successful, you have to be transparent everywhere, right? I can't let my potential be inhibited by other people's bias, by my own like mental health, right? I have to do everything in my power to be my full self, because that's the only way that I know of to try to really accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish in a logical and efficient manner. So
I also understand that before you had your son, or like right up into that moment, you were still transitioning and like using tea medications and things like that. And you also shared on your Instagram that you had to stop kind of abruptly to go through the processes of having a child. I do want to know if you could provide any details versus how that was for you. Did it affect
yeah,
business, anything like
it was
that? Like,
crazy. Well, well, so first and foremost, so everything in my life is about planning, right? So I think that's the most important thing. So, for instance, when my wife and I were having a conversation about having children, we kind of went back and forth over which one of us would have them. Actually, when I first started, I was like, I absolutely will not have a kid. I was like, seriously, I was like, I will not do it. But then when I got older, I was like, well, one, it's actually super cheaper for me to just go ahead and just make the decision to have one kid, and my wife can have one kid, and then we both have like bio kids, because like we were talking about her like taking my egg. It got really complicated and it got really expensive when we were looking at the numbers. But then, as I got more comfortable, because that's why I mentioned the discomfort, because I was actually, one of the reasons I was so uncomfortable with the idea of having a child was because I was like, well, I'm supposed to be a bro. And the reality is I'm not a bro. I'm really not. Like, I am literally just I'm somewhere in between. Like, I'm not super feminine. I'm not super masculine. I'm somewhere in between. And so, and the reality is that, like, as soon as I got out of that trope of what a bro culture looked like, I was like, well, actually, it's not that big a deal to have a kid. Like, I was like, I can just wear baggier clothes and it's the same wardrobe. I'm just going to be uncomfortable. That's literally what I was saying. I was like, I'm just going to be uncomfortable. But to your point of like the transition, it was very strange, because I had been on testosterone for a year, right? And so, because I got on testosterone in 2019, and then we started the process to have the kid late 2020, and then early 2021 is when we actually did the transfer for the embryos and all that other type of stuff. So, for me, I've been on testosterone for over a year, and then you have to stop testosterone completely, right? You have to stop it completely. And then you have to immediately go, for us, we had to do IVF. So we immediately went on all the hormone stuff. So I went from like a higher than normal for female testosterone level to basically normal, to so that I could have a normal cycle. And then I went into like put me on all the hormones possible to make my ovaries go into overdrive. So it was literally like I felt crazy. I really did. I was like, I don't understand what's going on. I had all kinds of emotions and stuff like that. And my sister at one point was like, I cannot wait until this is over, because like literally you're annoying. And I was like, I'm sorry, but my body's going through so much right now and I can't control it, and this is the situation that we're in. And so, but once we actually got it going, so like once I got pregnant, it was just normal pregnancy hormones, which thank God. How often do you have someone say thank God for normal pregnancy hormones? Yes, but that's exactly how I felt. I was like, oh, so this is just normal now. Like this, I'm gonna feel like this every day. Like I won't have these ups and downs. Like I can do that. I can do that now. But yeah, but it was an interesting change. And then it was so interesting because then like after I had the baby, you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can go back on testosterone. So I was super like, okay, how much longer? Because I'm ready to get back on testosterone now. Because that was a part of it. And so, and just for the audience's sake, I'm on low dose testosterone. So it's a little bit different too than like people who do like the full dose, right? So I am non-binary. That's how I feel. So I'm not transitioning to be a man. I do have like some facial hair and stuff like that, which I love. Like I always wanted to have a beard and mustache. Even when I was a little kid, I was like, I wanted a beard and mustache and no boobs. There was like my two things. There was like the two things I wanted most. And so those are things that that I have accomplished now. And, one of the things about having the baby though, is that, there were these decisions that we had to make, right? Like as we were exploring it, like, cause I had top surgery before the baby. But at the same time, my doctor had already told me it was very unlikely that I'd be able to breastfeed. So I was like, oh, this is an easy decision, right? Well, let's just go ahead and do it. But you have to kind of go through all these checklists. Like, what things are you going to be concerned about? What things are you going to be concerned about? What can you deal with? Is your family going to be able to deal with you, transitioning off the testosterone? Because at least I had some examples of some other people. So they were like, oh, yeah, this is going to be how it feels. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I was like, by the way, I'm going to be like this. And so my wife was like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't sound ideal, but we'll navigate it, right? So it was really good to have, to be well resourced is the way I would say, like being well resourced to get the information and to just prepare for all those kind of ups and downs. And then also had a great therapist. So, because one of the things I was super worried about was gender dysphoria. I was like, being pregnant, is that going to make me feel dysphoric and things like that? Again, I was very fortunate. I didn't. I actually kind of liked being pregnant. I liked having a little dude. We would have our conversations all the time. I'm like, I see you kicking. I was like, you like this movie too, don't you? I was like, it's a good movie. Yeah, right. So
That's
it was pretty
literally
cool.
what I was just thinking. As far as the gender dysphoria and things go, I imagine that getting to the point of starting with coming out and then ultimately getting your transitioning, then starting your T and going through the top surgery, that took a lot of confidence, took a lot of willpower just to immediately have to stop that and just, for lack of a better, go in the reverse direction almost. Did that affect you mentally in any kind of way? Or did getting over these obstacles have like any positive outlook on the end as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the biggest thing was the hormonal change, right? Because I just felt like I wasn't in control of my emotions, and so like I try to be calm, and so it's like difficult to be calm, right? Because it's like I am having all these emotions, and I don't really have a good way of expressing them, and so I had to apologize a few times. I was like, I'm not normally like this. I'm very sorry. So it was more like that stuff that really frustrated me because I don't like to
Mm-hmm.
hurt people, unintentionally. And so that was the stuff that bothered me more. The body stuff didn't. Like I said, I think the main thing is like, one, like I kind of like prepped for it and I started buying like what I thought were going to be like clothes that didn't bother me too much. Right. Because like, so I'm a very like, I'm like, so, look behind me, you can kind of start seeing my shoe collection. So I have like, I'm like really big on like, shoes and clothes and fashion and all this stuff. Like I love it. And so I was actually more concerned about the fact that I wasn't going to be able to find things that made me feel comfortable from a clothes perspective, right? So it wasn't necessarily being pregnant. It was like, okay, if I'm really fat in my belly, but then my waist is the same, like how does that work? Like, can I find outfits that I'm going to still feel as confident in? And so that was actually a big focus of mine was finding clothes first and before I needed them. And so like it was nice to have, a wardrobe that I actually liked wearing, right? It's also nice to have a spouse who, had knew me before, like way before I even came out as
Mm-hmm.
trans, right? So like, someone who knew my entire history. And so, again, I was just exceptionally well resourced, right? And most people are not. Like just in society as a whole, like that's one of the number one things that's the biggest issue that we have in society. It isn't necessarily about like whether people have, opportunities. Like you don't have resources. Like literally in your community, you may not have the resources. The reason I was able to go do all this stuff is because I lived in the Bay Area at the time, and we had some of the best specialists in the whole world, and they knew exactly what to do to make this as seamless and easy as possible for me. If I didn't have that, maybe my experience would have been drastically different, right? And maybe I wouldn't have been happy. Even my job, they were like, "We know that you're trans, and now you're telling us you have a baby." Okay, we got a team for that. They could just tell us what to do. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't have any of the same anxieties that I think that most trans people typically have. I didn't have any of the same anxieties that most women typically have, right? I just didn't because, my team was phenomenal. And they were the ones who were like, this is probably how you're going to feel. And so I knew. And it just, when you know and you just feel like there's people who are going to take care of you if something comes up, it just makes all the difference in the
You
world.
know how I think that also accurately describes like the picture you painted for how Divergent Ventures is very personalized when it comes to how you help the businesses and brands that you work with. I'm glad you brought up your shoes too, because I was
Exactly.
peeking at them like when we first started. I was gonna say if you want to like show us like some of your favorite pairs if you feel like it.
I was like, actually, there's so many
All
though.
goes way over there. That's pretty cool.
Like, yeah, that's what I was saying. I was like, in order for me to choose,
You
let's see,
choose
which
just
one would
one, I
be.
guess.
Well, I will show you my gateway shoe.
Okay.
This is one of the first shoes that I ever found that I was obsessed with. And it's actually funny because it says a lot about my personality as well. So this is Concepts times Nike Ugly Christmas Sweater. This is from like probably like 2011, 2012, or something like that. Um, and I actually love Christmas. Like, it's like my favorite holiday. I saw these and I had to find them. But when I went to go find these, I found out there were so many other collaborations. And that's how I ended up being a sneakerhead. Like, that's really so this is a drug. This shoe's a drug. Right? It's not a typical drug, but it is a reason I now have like 300 pairs of shoes.
So, Gay family, make sure when you check out B's Instagrams and other social handles, aside from her informational posts about venture capital and her consulting, every now and then she's going to dibble and dabble into her shoes. That's how I found out about them. It's pretty cool. I like that she shares. She's extremely transparent. And that,
Well, and
yeah,
one
sure.
quick note. My pronouns are
Oh,
they,
excuse me.
them.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yes.
Um, I like that they're
No
extremely
problem.
transparent with everything above the scenes with venture capitalism and behind the scenes. And I'm sure everyone else is going to enjoy that too. Is there anything else you want to add for the Gay family to know?
Well, I mean, I think the one thing. So actually, a recent LP reached out to me, and she was like, "The reason I reached out to you is because at the end of your interview, you said if you want to learn about investing or become an investor in the fund, just contact me." So hey, just contact me if you want to learn more. A few of us are also doing like these seminars that we're going to do that are just explaining how VC and being an LP, an investor, all that type of stuff works. And then also just in general, you know, I'm super stoked to bring more people into the crowd because there's no reason that we can't underwrite the best companies in the world, and they happen to look like people like us. So
Thank you so much, B. We appreciate you for taking the time to share everything about your business with Gay Magazine, and we hope to see you soon. If you have any new business ventures or anything else appearing, we'll always keep in touch. And just thank you so much for just educating on us on something that isn't, I would say, the common, but you are the first, and that's really important, especially for our community and creating these opportunities for this diverse group and just people who don't have the resources. I think that's really important. I was going to say thank you for that.
yeah, well, and thank y'all for having me. I actually went and read many of the articles, and it's like super cool. So like, thank y'all for what
Thank
y'all are
you.
doing as well.